Before we, oh, it's recording now. Um, um, so I was thinking if the beginning section, if we can, because we have a lot towards the backside of the meeting, keep it to like 30 to 45 minutes so that we can get everything in from the back, when it's on the agenda. So this is the May, I don't even know what today is, 21st meeting of the State Board of Education's Outreach and Advocacy Committee. We are going to start by having a discussion on DYRS from Claire Blumenson from the Social Justice Project. And then later, towards the back end of the conversation, we'll have Advocates for Justice to speak about the school bus and policing incidents around that situation. Yeah, let's get started with that then. So Emily, do you want to kind of, since you School Justice Project, thank you, Maria. Emily, you invited Claire. Do you want to kind of give a quick update background?
Sure. And Claire, you can fill in the gaps. I mean, I know Claire because I teach a course called Education, Equity, and Advocacy. And I have had the great, actually, now that I'm thinking about it, SJP has been our most consistent partner. So the students do a advocacy, semester-long advocacy internship with a actual advocacy organization in DC. And so this will be our, if you partner with us again in the fall, which I hope you will, this will be our 6th year. So that's how I know Claire. And I just put the SJP link in the chat so you can look at the amazing work that they do. And I will let Claire talk more about that. But I think I am right that you are one of the founding directors. Is that correct? Right. And a lawyer that defends court-involved youth in the district who have IEPs to make sure that they get the services that they need. I will let you take it from there.
Great. And so would it be helpful to just sort of give an overview of what we do, and then
yeah,
I'll let you ask specific questions that you guys are most interested in. So yeah, hi everyone. Thanks so much for having me here. I'm Claire Blumenson. I'm the executive director and co-founder of School Justice Project. So School Justice Project uses special education law to ensure that older court-involved students with disabilities have access to a quality education. So we work with young people ages 17 to 22 who have special education needs and are involved in either the juvenile or criminal justice system. And the reason why we work with this sort of older adult student population is that they can have some really complex issues because they could simultaneously be involved with the juvenile system, the criminal system, potentially the child welfare system, but they still have federal and local special education rights, but they're often sort of left out of the picture, and education for them can get really complicated, particularly as they're sort of moving back and forth from facilities and also like through different agencies. So we achieve our mission in using sort of 3 strategies: direct representation, systemic advocacy and policy, and then community outreach and legal training. So through the direct representation program, we're working with individual young people, both while they're locked up and then when they're coming home, to make sure that they're getting education while in facilities and then able to sort of get into the school that can meet their needs when they return to the community. And we see our work as sort of increasing educational equity, but also decreasing the use of mass incarceration, because we also partner with defense attorneys. We're a very defense-oriented organization. So we partner with defense attorneys to seek alternatives to incarceration. So if the young person that, like, where we're their education attorney, if that person has a pending case or a subsequent case after we've started working with them, we'll team up with their defense attorney to provide more information to the court, and then also put a reentry plan in place. So lots of times what that could look like is finding the right school in the community that could meet that young person's needs, and then also, connecting with social services and different things that can help ensure that the young person is successful, and then presenting that plan to the judges in either family court or in criminal court, to ask that rather than incarcerating the young person, that that the student be able to be released to the community to take advantage of all of these services. So that's the direct representation program, and that's sort of what we learned from our clients, and that makes us pretty well positioned to advocate for specific systemic change, because our clients obviously are the ones who have had lived experience. They know what the key issues are, and so they're the ones who are closest to solutions. So from what we learn with our clients, we advocate for change on systemic barriers that are preventing students from being able to access education while they're involved in the court system. So in the systemic advocacy and policy program, we use high impact litigation, policy and legislative advocacy, coalition building, and sort of cross-sector collaboration to try to get rid of some of the barriers that continue to plague each of our clients. And examples of that generally are being able to accumulate credits, like school credits for courses that they've completed while they're in facilities, and also being able to access education while they're incarcerated, and a quality education while they're incarcerated. And so those are sort of two of the key systemic issues that, if we only addressed on a client-specific basis, we would continue to have clients forever. And so then our final strategy is community outreach and legal training. And so again, based on what we've learned from our clients and our practice, we train different stakeholders, so usually court stakeholders, but also in the education sector as well, on how to integrate special education and disability law into the court context. And so that looks different depending on the type of stakeholder, right? So for judges, we're providing more information. For probation officers, we might be sort of explaining some of the logistical issues. So if you have an adult, like a 19-year-old, the probation officer might not necessarily think that the young person is in school. And so they might schedule meetings for, 1:00 p.m. But if that young person's court order says, to follow this, you need to both meet with your probation officer and attend school, then if they leave school to meet with their PO, then they're violating. And if they don't go meet with their PO because they're in school, they're violating. So there can be those kinds of communication gaps that we can help fill. So that's sort of the overarching gist of our work. We've been around, my co-founder and I met at the Public Defender Service after law school, and we started School Justice Project in 2013. So we're still a relatively new organization, and we have 5 attorneys.
Thank you, that's helpful. I know I have a question. Does anyone have any questions at the moment? Fraser?
Yes, I taught at Cardozo for 40 years, so I'm aware of students going through the criminal justice system and not being serviced. What kind of success? I've got 2 questions, but the first one I want to ask, and then if you can answer that, and then I'll ask a second one. What success rates have you had with this, with what you want to do versus what the system will allow you to do? And let's say the past 2, forget the pandemic, go back to 2018, let's say 2018, 2019.
So I think it's been very clear that having a special education lawyer can make a world of difference at the individual level. And the things that we're tracking, that we're measuring, where there's generally a problem if there's not a special education attorney involved, include things like re-enrolling in school, particularly post-incarceration, mitigated sentencing. So you would think that from this work and what we're communicating with the judges, that there might be fairer, and for us that means less harsh sentencing. And we've seen in about 95% of our cases that it has mitigated sentencing and also reduced detention when that's at issue. And for enrollment, about 85 to 90% re-enroll once they start working with us, re-enroll directly in school. And then also the ability to accumulate or transfer credits. We've recovered over the course of our time hundreds and hundreds of school credits for the young people we work with, as well as community service hours that often, if you didn't have a special education attorney, they would just sort of get lost in the ether. But being able to have a lawyer who's pulling all your records from all your different placements, and also working sort of on the front end, that if you're getting sent out to a residential facility, for example, that doesn't offer Spanish, which is a requirement, that we deal with that on the front end. So maybe that looks like doing some kind of online class that, you know, the school system would accept. Because, you know, right when I started, I just remember this situation where there was someone who was about to age out and all he needed to graduate was Spanish, and he was sent to a facility that didn't have Spanish. So he aged out while he was there and then was unable to get his diploma. And so situations like that, we've been very, very successful in. And I would say the problem though, with only working at the individual level is that, like, even if we're successful in every single case, it all, you know, it doesn't change the system at all, right? So like, if you didn't have a special education attorney, nothing would have changed about school credits, or nothing would have changed about like the services you're getting while you're locked up. Yes, having an attorney can help that, but that's only for that individual student. So the systemic barriers will not be alleviated by that kind of work. So that's sort of why we had to ramp up our systemic advocacy program, because we saw, even after, you know, 10 years, including the fellowship, 10 years of work in this exact, like, very niche field, like things weren't really changing at the systems level, but they were changing for that individual client. So I'd say
that's very, very helpful. I know that the vast majority of the students who are incarcerated or have special education needs, and that the system doesn't recognize that. I'm sure of that. I mean, I know that we at Cardozo, we would have maybe at least a third of the students had special education needs, and a lot of the students weren't recognized that they even had special education needs, because they, you know, people sort of ignore it. My second question has to do with the pandemic, because I know that DYRS during the pandemic was really just shut down educationally completely. There was no education going on. They couldn't use, when they were in the jail, not in DYRS, they weren't even able to use a device at all. So that what is going to be done come August, hopefully, when the schools open in person, about the system I mean, it has to be screaming going on to make sure that people understand that these are our students and they're not being serviced at all. And it just, if anything more could enhance the school to prison pipeline, that was definitely it. So what can we do, or what can we help you scream about to make sure that the system knows this? I know that next week we are going to be testifying about post-pandemic education in the school system. I'm going to be testifying about the buildings themselves, but this definitely needs to be brought up. What can we do to help?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, you articulated the exact issue that we've been sort of grappling with for this year. And, you know, we have a class action lawsuit right now about young people who are incarcerated at DC jail who haven't received anything since the beginning of the pandemic. Right. And of course, for everybody, like, the pandemic has been really difficult, but for the students who are incarcerated during this time, it's been difficult in so many different ways and at such a deeper level. You know, I think the idea of getting compensatory education for the time that was lost is going to be critical. And what those services look like really will be different depending on the student. So I think making sure that that there's public attention on the experience that incarcerated young people have had during this time and what that's meant for their education is really important. But also making sure that you know, the system writes, you know, immediately. And I think for us, what would be very helpful from you would be to just sort of call attention to the students who are involved in the court system, because so often, you know, because it's just a smaller population of students, and there's just been sort of less advocacy around this group of students, they're sort of left out of the conversation. And even with the school to prison pipeline conversation, so much is on front end. So, you know, detention, discipline, and like suspension, expulsion, sort of keeping kids out of the juvenile system in the first place. But for students who are already involved in either the juvenile or criminal system and are at the deeper end, of the school to prison pipeline, we need to make sure that the city is focusing on them too. And that as a city, we can't recover until we've basically grappled with the complete absence of education for all of these young people. So I think just like continuing to call attention to court-involved students with disabilities would be extremely helpful.
Thank you so much. I think that we're supposed to submit our testimony today to the, and if someone else isn't going to, I'll add that to mine, because it's the same problem. It's the lack of response from the system. And they've got all this money coming in, but they're going to, I just don't have a good feeling they're going to spend the money right.
Right.
And so I just, unless Carlene or Emily or Ebony Rose are going to volunteer to add that to their testimony.
I mean, honestly, even a sentence like, we especially need to think about court-involved students with disabilities and what's happened to them. Like even that one sentence would make a difference. And it's something new, right? That like has not really happened in the past in broader education conversations. And then the other thing I would say is calling attention to the need for free special education lawyers for adult students with disabilities is important, because lots of times, I mean, unless you have money to pay, $1 million for a special education lawyer, like you're not going to get one. And in DC, there's already this very innovative court appointment panel that happens in family court. But again, that leaves out the 18 to 22-year-olds. So there is legislation on that pending. But what we're hoping is that, especially with all of the issues surrounding COVID, that the city can also focus on the importance of having special education lawyers for young people in the court system, particularly.
Also, I don't think it's too late to sign up to testify for the hearing next week on the 26th. I would encourage you to do that. That would be, I mean, this is stirring testimony, but it would be, you only get 3 minutes. So, you could fill up 3 minutes with that for sure. Okay, I'll be quiet.
And you can submit written testimony. I was actually, if it's not too much trouble, if you have something already written down, like just bullet points that you can share with us on those 2 points you're suggesting we should make. I just think it's the kind of thing that actually Mendelsohn will follow up on and want to ask questions, and we will want to be able to respond intelligently and accurately. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so just like, some background bullet points on, for instance, with the second point you made about the need for free SPED. Do we not use that term SPED, by the way? I'm just going to be real transparent. I'm not sure. Is that
I don't generally, but I think it's okay. I'm not sure.
All right. How did you see? This is exactly the kind of thing. It would be helpful to have the bullet points so I don't use the wrong language, but like, you said special needs defense lawyers. Is that right?
Special education.
Okay, so I was just shortening it. Special education defense lawyers. I can imagine
not defense lawyers, just because that they might confuse us with criminal defense attorneys. Okay. So just special education attorneys.
Special education attorneys, and that generally you're saying older students are left out of that. They don't qualify for that.
Yeah, I would say like, for anyone it's important, but particularly there's just this sort of gap for the adult students who are in criminal court, who still have special education rights and theoretically, would also want special education attorneys, especially because their rights inure to them at age 18. So like until before that, the special ed lawyers would represent their parents. So at 18, they're in a particularly, vulnerable position, having just gotten their rights to them, but not necessarily, knowing how to enforce them, because the law is extremely complicated. And honestly really requires legal assistance.
So is that a legislation issue? Like what would we be asking for from council?
Honestly, I think just having council support the pending legislation. In February, there was legislation introduced, and I can forward this to you guys. I think it's called Special Education Attorneys for Emerging Adults in the Criminal System Act. I'll send you the exact name. But basically it would put a panel in place and likely a pilot so that we could collect data on it, but a panel would be in place which the court would create, similar to the one that exists through the court already in the juvenile setting. And that would make private special education attorneys able to represent young people and then get paid through the court. So that way, if the young people don't have money for a special education attorney, they could still get one. And it's the first of its kind. This legislation would be the first of its kind in the country. So honestly, like, we think there's a big incentive for DC to do this and sort of lead as a model. And then it could be replicated across the country because we're operating under a federal law. So this could actually change things for everyone.
Thank you so much. That's really helpful. And yeah, sorry for my lack of language around this, but this is why we asked you here.
Thank you so much, Claire. If you want to hang out, because we might circle back to you. So now we want to introduce Maria, who is going to, hi Maria, is going to talk about we are well aware of the school bus incident where the police were called to handle a pretty minor incident of a student on the bus wearing a mask, and it caught a lot of our attention. I know this board was interested in kind of, we know that it's, I think, it was very visible of a larger issue from OSSI. And so we wanted to see what can be done, what this body could do. So welcome.
Welcome. Well, again, thank you very much for having me. If it's okay, I'm going to talk very briefly about AJE, and I want to connect up some of the conversation about transportation to what Claire talked about, because even though it might not be readily apparent, this is all very connected. And I also want to give Claire a little bit more attention for something she talked about that's really important, which is the transcript issue. She said, oh, one of the things we do is sort through transcripts. DC doesn't have a unified system of tracking credits. There's no standardization anywhere in the system. So a kid can move LEAs and all of a sudden the goalposts for when they graduate has changed. So I want to kind of elevate what Claire said. I mean, she's not just, going through records and making sure kids get all their credits. She's doing something that really the city should do. And really, I would argue that OSSI should do, because there should be a coherent database. You shouldn't need a special education attorney to understand your transcript. And so many of our kids do. So it's super important work. And I just kind of wanted to elevate that as very important. And there is legislation on that I'm sure Claire will also send around with the special education attorneys for youth defendants, which is also really important legislation that AJE also testified in support of. So AJE, now that I'm done talking about Claire, although I'm sure I'll loop back to her testimony in a second. As I think you all know, AJE is the federally designated Parent Training and Information Center for the District of Columbia. We recently were re-awarded that grant. We've held that grant for over 20 years. And we will be the District of Columbia's sole Parent Training and Information Center for the next 5 years. And we enjoy that work and continue to do that. And part of our mandate is to provide families with advice, counsel, information, training, support as they navigate all parts of the special education system. And honestly, because of kind of the reality of the situation, it's really all aspects of navigating the education system, including things like the transcript issue that Claire mentioned, which again, I just, it's so huge, including the partial credit issue, which is, we can talk about that more in a minute as I derail your meeting and decide that this is what we're going to talk about. So, that's kind of our work. And part of that work has been helping families access transportation, but also navigate the transportation system. And obviously we were very aware of the incident with MPD. And I think it's really important to view what happened there as two separate problems. One, there is this problem of calling MPD, right? The police are not appropriate for dealing with what essentially is a customer service and communication problem. Okay, so let's just kind of set that. It was inappropriate to call MPD. dispatch bus drivers should have the skills to deal with this without the engagement of law enforcement officers, especially when we're candidly dealing with kids and parents. But behind this customer service failure was a database failure and an information systems failure. And I want to take a second to walk you through how a parent experiences the transportation system in DC. So let's kind of visualize. You have just moved. You have changed your address. Your child attends a non-public school. Okay, let's say they go to, I don't know, a non-public school right over the border in Maryland. So they've got about a 45-minute bus ride. You inform your child's school of your new address. Okay, your child's school, who sees your child every day, who you talk to all the time, takes that non-public school takes that information and gives it to your LEA, your local educational agency, which is the legally responsible agency for providing your education. Okay, so that's kind of transition number one, where information can get lost, right? And we're still not at the person delivering the service. The LEA, and you're usually talking to the progress monitor as a parent. That's your most typical contact, although sometimes you're also talking to the special education coordinator. Not typically though. Then your LEA has to, within itself, get that information to one of the few people on that LEA staff who's trained to use OSSI's special database called TOTES to enter what's called a TRF, a transportation request form. Now, that transportation request form then has to go, once it's gotten to the right person in the LEA, then has to go to OSSI, where it is then where it is processed. And that is a 5 to 10 day process. Rerouting for changes of address takes up to 2 weeks, and sometimes longer. And the parent has no direct way to give the information to OSSI. I want to kind of just let that sink in. The person who's driving your kid around, the agency that is taking your, child with a disability that is so significant they have to be served outside of the jurisdiction in Maryland, you don't have a direct way to tell that agency, hey, I moved. You are instead dependent on your non-public school communicating with your LEA, entering things into a specialized database, doing this one particular form that not everybody's trained to do, and then getting it to the right people at OSSI, where they then process it and get things rerouted. That is a database and communications problem. And that's not okay. That's enormously inefficient. And parents have no direct way of making actual changes directly with OSSI. So they are, and one of the things that I do at my work is essentially help parents pester people along the line, right? Okay, make sure you give it to the right person at the non-public school, make sure you give it to the right person at the LEA, pester the LEA to make sure they've done it, and then make sure it gets over to OSSI. That's a lot of work for families. It's kind of unreasonable, okay? And really, yeah, and that's why in a lot of ways it's a database problem, candidly. And that's why we have so many inefficiencies in this system. And I think that unfortunately, any change that's made on the IEP has to also then be made to the TRF in TOTES, the transportation request form. So just because you sat at the IEP meeting with the team and you talked about, maybe the child needs a mask exception, maybe the bell time changed for the child, or maybe, where they're going for their after school program changed. Just because you did all that and you made all the changes on the IEP, that doesn't automatically show up at OSSI Department of Transportation. There still needs to be this special process with it going into TOTES, the TRF going into TOTES and getting over to OSSI. And that's, as I understand it, a big part of what happened and why there was this failure of communication over at OSSI that led to the customer service violation and the calling of MPD. So I would ask that this board, as you're thinking about, what should you be looking at and prioritizing, the data management issue, it's not an academic issue. It's not, it affects real people's lives all the time. And it's not some obscure, oh, we don't have good data, so we can't decide what teachers are good. No, we don't have good data, therefore kids don't graduate on time. Therefore I have a client who wound up taking repeat classes over and over again. I think Claire's had lots of those. We don't have a good database system. So therefore, this mom who did all the paperwork right still had to deal with a challenge on the bus with a mask. And she did all the stuff, she did everything she was supposed to do, or the data, or a student misses, yes, exactly. Or a student misses the first 2 weeks of school because of transportation. Yes. Or we have whole schools where, transportation is an ongoing headache and it's a huge drain on school resources. So the investment in a coherent database system, it's important for a lot of reasons, but I don't want you to forget that it's really important for kids and how it shows up for them in terms of, things like graduation, the bus coming into the right house, taking you to the right place in a timely fashion. And I also want to be clear that, Aussie DOT has been, we meet with them, we're part of a working group, we talk to them, they're not acting in bad faith. So I want to be really clear about that. They're good folks and we're talking to them, but this system is so inefficient that it's not okay. It's just not. So I hope that was helpful from our point of view. And I do know that Aussie, I assume that Aussie DOT is looking at an app and potentially a parent portal. So they have an app coming eventually. I know the pandemic has kind of pushed back some of their budgeting around that. But even with the app where a parent could look on their phone, it would kind of be like NextBus. Even with the app, that's not going to allow a parent to do that basic thing of update information directly with the person who's servicing their child. So they're still going to be stuck going through, either the non-public to the LEA or the LEA to the school.
Just on your last point, Maria, does OSSI at least acknowledge, or do they agree with your assessment that this is a database and communications problem, or do they frame it differently? Because that's an important place to start, I feel like, is understanding how they are seeing this.
I don't want to speak for them, so I feel a little bit uncomfortable answering that, but I feel like they acknowledge the fact that there's a real database problem, and there's a real systems communication problem. And I know that that's something that, as Aussie is looking at replacing SEDS with a new special education database, I know that's been part of that conversation. Because, for example, right now, kids who have 504 plans who are eligible for transportation, they kind of fall into this gap, right? Because they don't have IEPs, and therefore the systems don't automatically or semi-automatically talk to each other. So I think that people over at Aussie DOT recognize this is a suboptimal database system. And they're trying very hard to work around it. They do a huge amount of trainings. But, a broken system can only be kind of band-aided together, but so much. I do think that one space where we have some difference of opinion, just to be transparent, is that I think as a parent serving organization, I want to empower parents to directly update the service provider. I think it's ridiculous that a stressed out mom has to know to update her non-public, make sure her non-public tells her LEA, make sure the LEA tells all the right people. And so it gets to Aussie DOT. I would love it if parents could directly update Aussie DOT. And I don't think that is something that, I think Aussie DOT disagrees with that, and they would prefer that information come to them through the LEA. And I think we just kind of agree to disagree on that point. And I think they're,
We have about a couple more minutes. I know Fraser, you came off mute, so you want to ask your question?
Yes, I'm going to go backwards in what you were saying. You were talking about OSSI's going to have an app.
yes, sir.
I feel about as much confidence in apps as I do with making sure that all the students have devices. That's the I don't know if ass backward is a term that I can use, but it's so ridiculous that they assume that everyone knows how to use an app like I don't,
Mhm.
because I don't. And and that's not the way that you do things. For Carlene and Ebony Rose have been on the board long enough, but they may not have ever heard me talk about. We don't want to go back to new normal, because normal wasn't working
Mhm.
at all. So I've always talked about the new reality. And does OSSI have a department that focuses on this particular problem? Or, I mean, do they have an actual office where people know what you're talking about, going from the provider to the LEA to the da-da-da, and is watching over that all the time?
Yes, so OSSI, within OSSI, there's the office of, DOT, Department of Transportation, OSSI DOT. And they are they definitely have good people. They've got a good operations and a good data. They have a good operations person. They,
But they're the final step in the process, right?
yeah,
I mean, is there someone that's watching the process get to the Department of Transportation? Because we're not talking about the fact that the buses aren't running. We're talking about the fact that the buses might not be going to the right place or don't know where to go. And it has to be fixed on that tour to the transportation department, right?
right. And that would be, I think the answer to that is no, realistically. And I think I think when I look at the auditor's report, I think a lot of how she talked about that lack of coherent data
Right.
and data tracking, this is part of that. So I would say, within the Department of Transportation, they're doing their very, very best with a very not working well system. But I have not, I don't know that data has been prioritized in the way it should be, to answer your question. And I don't think I haven't seen any evidence of someone outside of OSSI, Department of Transportation, looking at this kind of telephone tree of communicating where kids need to be and when, and paying attention to it. And I do know the pandemic has pushed back the purchasing of some of those databases and the upgrading.
Yeah, but they're getting all this money.
Oh,
They're
yeah.
they need to prioritize this money to fix what wasn't working normally, so that when we go to that new reality, that things are fixed, rather than, because I know that the system
Mhm.
is, if nothing is done in August, they're going to go back and start doing just like they used to do it.
Mhm.
And there are so many gaps in the just what used to be that need to be fixed with this money.
Yeah, and so thank you, thank you, Fraser. Because I think, and to just kind of wrap the conversation, and what we're encountering is, I think, like I remember being at OSSI, and the data point was, they do about 13,000 rides a day or something like that without incident. However, it's always the few, right? And sometimes with special education, I had a conversation with a grandmother right before our public meeting. And it's always about, because the population is so small, the chancellor even responded like, oh, well, we're shifting classrooms around because of the student population, attendance and enrollment numbers. And it's because this population doesn't have strong enough numbers, but that shouldn't be the reason why they don't receive funding, why they don't get the right attention. So I appreciate both of your action steps in regards to, one, calling attention in our testimonies from Claire for our students with IEPs who are engaged in the juvenile justice system. and Maria for really highlighting OSSI's data management issue around transportation, because I distinctly remember being at St. Coletta, who 100% of our students, minus the people who their parents came and got them, every first beginning of school was a nightmare. And this is with the attendance coordinator and a transportation coordinator. They're solely dedicated to getting kids to and from school. So totally have witnessed it. And I think this board can take next steps around that. So I thank you for your time. We're going to transition to our next area, but we know that we can just as easily as we got you scheduled, we can reach out to you. So we greatly appreciate that. So bye, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
So members, I'm actually thinking, because I know Rep. Sutter is on the line, to have her quickly kind of reframe her area of advocacy around student, pedestrians, and transportation. So I'm basically moving up new business so that we can free her up on her Friday. So Rep. Sutter, I see I thought you were moved up. Oh, she can't speak at all, or
Try again.
Jessica, are you there? Jessica? No.
She said she can't unmute. So while we're working to unmute, I'll start with that. Okay, wait. You said she can't speak. Okay, we'll try to stand in the gap for you, Jessica, and if you can somehow we can get the technology to unmute you, let you kind of introduce. But during our last working session, we began.
Hello?
Yay, there we go. All right.
Thank you. Sorry, I was in as an attendee, not a panelist. I think that was the problem.
Gotcha. So do you want to quickly introduce your area for advocacy, and then we'll this committee will just kind of go into deliberate about what we want to do.
Sure. Thank you so much for letting me have this time to share this. So I am interested in asking the committee to consider travel, student travel, on foot or by bicycle to and from school as part of our safe passage advocacy. I think we've all watched over the past month that as our city has gradually reopened and folks have begun commuting into our city and visiting our city again in cars, there's been an increase in crashes where cars hit people, whether they're walking or on bicycles. And it's happening in recreation areas like Haynes Point. It's happening on common routes children use to travel to school. And it's happening in our neighborhoods. There was a young person on Capitol Hill, not far from Stewart Hobson Middle School and Peabody Elementary, who was hit and run over by a vehicle, fortunately survived with injuries. But I think that as we return children to school, there's a lot of things that you all talked about earlier in the meeting that pertain to keeping children safe and making sure children are safe. And I think that the physical safety of children traveling to school, especially those walking and biking, is really important. So there's a couple ways I think we could do this. One is OSSI Department of Transportation has certain things they do in and around schools for traffic calming measures, whether that's speed tables, like the super wide speed bumps that actually have the crosswalks painted on them, speed cameras, other sort of road diet measures, like Maryland Avenue is undergoing one of those right now here on Capitol Hill. C Street has been undergoing a long construction process to try to reduce the speed cars travel on those streets. So I think that's one thing, is we could advocate to OSSI Department of Transportation. I'm sorry, I've got those special ed stuff in my head. We could argue to DDOT about the need for more traffic calming measures around schools. I think a second thing we could do is include this in our testimony to the special committee on COVID recovery around how this kind of safety for students is essential to going back to school, and get Councilmember Allen and Councilmember Gray to include that in their body of work. And I'm sure there are other ways we could go about it, but those are sort of two ideas.
Cool.
Are you going to include that in your testimony, Jess?
I am, and I'm sorry, Fraser. I haven't forgotten that you asked us to get to you today. I'm probably just going to send out a bunch of bullet points because I will not get to write it until this weekend. But I will send you some high-level notes.
Any other questions for Rep. Sutter before we let her go?
I guess I'm just curious. I think it makes sense to me, but I'm just also wondering, I have not heard anything about this, but that doesn't mean it's not a thing, obviously. And I'm just curious if you have been hearing from families, students, how did this get raised for you?
Sure, it's a great question. So, Ward 6 loves our bike and walk to school days. And the Ward 6 Public School Parent Organization, our ed council here in Ward 6, is always the organizer of that event. And we just had Bike to School Day, and that was a theme of the Bike to School Day event, was sort of what would help you feel safer about traveling to school by foot or by bike. And that came up for a lot of children, these ideas of like, I need the cars to slow down. The cars are frightening. I think a lot of families feel that way as well. My ANC commissioner has raised this on a number of occasions because we have sort of a straight shot on C Street to Constitution here on the Hill, passes by the back of Eastern High School, Elliott Hine, and Morey Elementary. And we have cars race through that every morning because they're commuting. They're coming from other places. They're not thinking this is the neighborhood where children go to school. They just sort of fly through. And I think that's pretty similar to what folks in Ward 7 and 8 experience on like Eastern Avenue and the other sort of arteries into the city, that folks don't think of this as a place where children walk to school or get off a bus and walk across the street to their school. They think of it as a commuter route. So I've been hearing it from ANC commissioners. And then finally, the Bike Advisory Council, the BCAC, several members of that council reached out to me. They meet typically the same nights we do down at 441. And so in the first few years of my time on the board, when we were actually physically going to meetings, I would run into a few members of the Cyclist Advisory Council leaving our meetings. And we started having these conversations about like, how could we link in advocacy around safe infrastructure for bicyclists and pedestrians into aspects of education. And so when the accident on Haynes Point happened, and we sadly lost 2 residents of the city, one of the members of the advisory council reached back out to me and said, listen, every elected official in the city council and everybody else needs to be advocating for the safety of all people on our roads. And I think that Board of Ed should do something about it. So those are sort of the 3 things that have come up.
I actually, and the principal, I talked to the principal of Garfield Elementary this week and didn't mention anything about this hearing, and this is an issue, but he's been at Garfield for, I think he's at 11 years. And he's mentioned since 2011. So I guess the last 10 years of his tenure, he's had, is it 2 students, 1 parent hit who were walking. And then a band, or maybe I have it backwards. And then the band teacher and a couple of people who driving because of the blind spot that's on Alabama Avenue. And he was just mentioning as State Board of Education rep, I was asking like, well, how can I support you? And he was mentioning there was some advocacy around traffic calming measures, and they're working with the mayor, and some things had started with like they got flashing lights, but he's just saying, people were responsive, but they need more because they're coming off of Suitland Parkway. And he said he's done it himself where he's trying to, late for work and can get up to 60 miles an hour. So they're just asking for like a stoplight near Garfield. I'm like, you might need a stoplight and a ticket light or something to, really enforce that. So it was just interesting that this week, a principal wanted traffic calming measures. I know Hart is another one where Mississippi Avenue, their ANC is very engaged in that piece. And a neighbor actually is too, because, waking up with a car in your front yard isn't fun. But Mississippi Avenue right in front of Hart is literally -1 stop sign that gets ran. You can get some good speed. So, and you have Hart sits on one side, and really the kids, everyone's crossing the street because where the apartments are and where the houses are, you have to cross the street because there's no homes. So I know at least 2 schools in 8, and I'm sure there's people I haven't touched yet who are possibly interested in more the student pedestrian piece. I haven't heard the bike piece, but I appreciate that pedestrians are looped into your advocacy.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, it's the notion of like anyone not encased in steel when they're traveling is going to be more vulnerable. And we want to make sure that everybody who is traveling via whatever mode is able to be safe on our roads. And I can't imagine anything gets more sad than the thought of children being in harm's way physically trying to get to school.
I know Rep. Thompson has her hand up.
Yeah, I mean, I won't say this is something I've heard necessarily. I guess I think about it a little bit differently. So I was an ANC commissioner. And I've worked with schools to try to get traffic calming measures. I've participated in safe passage conversations in Ward 7. And Ward 7 is and Ward 8 too, is very car dependent. I think there is a tension between making sure our communities aren't as car dependent, and like people feel like the well-heeled of our community feel like there's a war on cars. And so you don't get the same, I don't know what the word is, but you don't get the same excitement or interest in things like bike lanes and other, like it fits. So there's a whole dynamic there that is true. That being said, we actually have had a bunch of times where we have students who've been hit by vehicles, or just we actually have some of the least safe intersections in the city, and nobody's done anything about it. I will acknowledge that there is a bit of a bad taste when a lot of the conversations center on things like bike lanes, recreation, and it comes down to feeling like certain people's issues get addressed, and then like it's like, oh, this has been an issue in Ward 7 for a long time. I want to acknowledge that because it will be part of the conversation. We do have a huge chunk of kids who travel to school, and for them, safety is not just like, can I ride my bike to school? Because most of them can't ride their bike to the schools that they go to. It is I need to be able to cross whatever street my school is at. And is the bus going to be safe for me? Because I'm probably riding on a bus or a train or whatever it is. So I acknowledge that this is an issue. I've more than heard it. I've tried to help with it. But I want us to be mindful when we talk about, as we start, if this is something we pick up and start to elevate, like just what that means for different communities. Because we can't even have, for real, a bike to school day in Ward 7, because our kids, that's not a privilege they currently have. Like when I remember working with DC Promise Neighborhood, and in that little teeny footprint, the kids went to over 100 different schools. And so if I believe it's an issue, I also believe that for us, if our kids are really going to be safe all the way to school, it's bigger than can they just cross the street.
Cool. So
can I respond to that, Rep. Reed, for a quick second?
Sure, and then we'll turn it over to the committee. We'll let you go and turn it over to the committee.
Thank you so much. So I really appreciate that, Representative Thompson, and I want to be clear that I don't want this to turn into a war on cars advocacy. Something that occurred to me this weekend, I was in Connecticut visiting my brother, who lives in a suburban community where everyone drives enormous vehicles. And yet they have these signs all over their streets and neighborhoods that say, drive like your child lives here, drive slowly, children live here. And it occurred to me that I think the piece of advocacy I'm looking for is not anti-car, but how do we keep children and their families and their teachers safe, no matter who is traveling on the roads? So cars and bikes alike, traveling on the roads, we want everyone to be safe. I wonder if there's a way to consider this advocacy and remove the bike piece, so that we don't sort of push on triggers for folks in parts of the city, and instead talk about it as though it is a getting kids to school safely piece, and making sure that that is possible in every part of the city, including children crossing streets to board buses, children crossing streets to reach metro stations, children crossing streets to get out of their parents' cars and get to their schools. But the idea that it's about the physical safety of our children throughout their entire journey, including the times they interact with cars. So I'll leave it to the committee, but I really appreciate calling that out, and certainly do not want this to become a war on cars, bikes are best dialogue, just about the physical safety of children in proximity to vehicles. Thank you.
Thank you, Rep. Sutter. All righty. So committee members, based on what we've heard, what are our suggested, I'll have my little form up about what we were supposed to do, but you're suggesting next steps on this topic.
Well, I know Dan has some information from the Ward 7 Safe Passage conversation specifically around this. I do think that, and I don't know a bunch about what the board has taken on as far as safe passage advocacy outside of some of the things I've participated in with the student advocate. I think my push is just to think about, like, just like we talk about whole child academics, what does whole child safety look like? Because the things that come to mind for me are, like, we have students who, you know, have been injured walking home from school. Like we lost, you know, Zaire, I don't know how long ago that was. And he was stabbed. That's not safe. That's not safe. Or we have students that we lost a student who was going to DC Prep because they were hit on East Capitol Street and they were getting out of car to cross the street, and many families do that. That's not safe, to Rep. Sutter's point. We have students who are literally, there is the whole aspect of traveling. We have families asking, like, what does it mean for my kid to go back to school during COVID? And what will they be exposed to, since they're probably going to have to get on, you know, the train or the bus? That's not safe. And so I think starting with, like, the Office of the Student Advocate and some of the information they've collected, both from students and community members, would be helpful, but also pushing ourselves to ask, like, as people, like, what does it look like to have a full safe experience on the way to school is really important. That I think that for me would be something I would champion. Because if not, then we're fooling ourselves a little bit.
Frazier, I saw you.
Yeah, I'm glad that Jessica sort of moved the bicycles out of the conversation, because I think that would be destructive, not instructive, if we did that. My concept of safe passage, to just mimic what Ebony Rose is talking about, is, you know, how do you get from Roosevelt to the subway station at Petworth? That's the major safe passage problem. Same thing happened at Cardozo. Just to get from Cardozo to the U Street station was a safe passage problem. And what you were talking about the being safe on the bus, I mean, that was the biggest thing for me about opening schools, was what was it going to be like to be on a bus or a metro between your house and the school, with people that didn't have masks on, or people who had masks on, or people who were symptomatic or asymptomatic, all of that stuff that you can't check on. A lot of parents weren't going to send their students and didn't send their students to school just because of the transportation problem, not for any other reason. It was because of the getting to school was the biggest problem. So if we're talking about safe passage, I think we need to talk about both the danger that the neighborhood might bring, but also the danger that the transportation might bring.
Yeah.
Because I know that most of the students at certain schools, they get to the school through public transportation. They don't get dropped off by mommy and daddy at the school or ride their bikes to school or anything like that. I rode my bike to school when I was a kid, but that's just not feasible. And especially Ward 4, which is the biggest ward, you know, it's public transportation that provides the transportation, the safe passage or not.
Cool. I just put our equity statement in our in the chat because speaking of, I like the holistic approach because I've been working with a couple of our ANCs around using the Safe Passage report to fight liquor stores in our neighborhood. We have a strip of liquor stores who are like, and it's a little off topic, but it's like when Dan's report says 1 in 8 students commuting in DC are going to experience harassment or, you know, like just certain conditions that our blocks well, shoot, even earlier in the summer, you know, we lost a student who was here from college because he went to a community store to get coffee with his younger brother in the back seat. And, you know, a shooting happened, and I cited Safe Passage for that as well. So I definitely think, you know, how do we, and actually a teacher reached out, was like, yeah, a lot of our students from Anacostia High School would go get snacks from there if this was a regular school day. I mean, you know, we were not in a pandemic. At that time, we'd be in that store getting snacks before coming to school. So I definitely like framing this in a larger conversation. I think it is the board's role. I do know in regards to history, I did try to, I reached out to our board. I know Emily did some research too to see, have we ever passed a resolution on, like, you know, specifically safe passages or safe commutes? I don't think we have. It was around students, homeless transportation for homeless students, but not specifically about how do we make sure that students can feel comfortable getting back and forth to school. And I just feel comfortable, but see, great example. I had to reach out to, again, an ANC because in the middle of the day, right when Ketchum Elementary School is letting out, there's about 4 people in front of a house that's been very problematic, passed out, very high on drugs, with very open air drug market going on. And I'm watching as a young lady is taking her younger siblings home and has to walk past that. I don't know what's going to happen between those cars while them students are transversing. So that's, again, I reached out around Safe Passage. I think I CC'd Dan. Dan has been our student advocate, very responsive, but I think like, how do we tie this to the Building Blocks Initiative? Like, how do we tie, I know, I believe Christina Henderson at large is thinking about more funds around Safe Passage. So I think it's just an opportunity for, like, the board to connect with some of the work that's being done on the council, this conversation about money, this conversation about resources. I said a lot, but I like the whole child approach.
Yeah, I agree. I think that'd be, and I think would be very much in line with the equity statement for us to do that. Excuse me.
Do you think this, I do think starting with a conversation with Dan makes a lot of sense, just to get caught up on where they are right now with their work and seeing where we can fit in, you know, like where we can support them, build on what they're doing, etc. I'm also wondering if, you know, I know that the conversation has started around the transition in schools around funding for the SROs, right? And I'm wondering if this could be part of that, at least, you know, near the school buildings. And I have no idea, like, if that funding is really specific for inside a building, but it seems like it could fit into a similar conversation about student safety and well-being, and being proactive about it and being holistic about it. And I think that's what the conversation has been around, the need to defund the police in our schools, right? Like it's really about changing how like what the resources are and how we address student safety and well-being. So I guess I'm just wondering if part of the conversation that council is having around how how that funding is used and how it changes can be both, outside of schools as well as inside of schools. So it's just a
Outside of conversations, are there any other tools that this committee sees that we could use? I know we're identifying what tools our board has in general, but given what we know, does anybody see anything else that we can do? Curtis, you're on mute.
I think
you double tapped the mute button.
I tapped it again. Okay. I think we have enough. I don't think we need to, because any resolution is going to be specifically general to such a thing. And I think that we have enough information right here with that.
Yeah, I know for me, for ward level, like, I think there's also some ward level advocacy that can be done. Like, for instance, talking to Garfield, like the only thing that principal said, he was like 3 things take away. He was like, if we can just get, safer routes, or he just wants that stoplight. So that's the, I think Hart wants the speed bumps, but, like what's going on, I guess, ward wide, continue to work on our version of safe passage around our current liquor licensing. So I think it's like conversation, it's a variety of levels. Like we can do stuff as ward level members, we can do things as the whole, with the conversation that we have with Dan. Anything else?
I think that's enough.
Okay.
To start. I appreciate Jessica bringing us to the advocacy committee. Yeah, because it's, I would say, especially as students return to school, it's going to become even more important. And I'm glad we're going to use the Office of the Student Advocates engagement, because it's not like they've just been thinking about this. Like they've actually done a lot of community engagement around this. I know that the council, there are council members who have inquired about what's come out of that. The deputy mayor for education's office also, is aware of this. And I think an opportunity to continue to build on, expand, and improve is a good exercise for the board and a good way to contribute, and helps us to see some continuity in the work. And so I look forward to that.
Emily?
I was just going to build on that and say, they've produced a lot of materials already on this topic that maybe it would be a good start for this committee to divide and conquer, and each of us read some of those materials and come back and discuss, or we could all read all of them, but I just know we're all stretched thin, so maybe we could jigsaw it. But they did a student survey on this topic that I have, to be quite honest, haven't read yet. It's in my to read file. They have in their annual reports, they always have a section on this, of the work that they've already done. So I think maybe before we have Dan talk to us, it would be good to get up to speed ourselves. So just a suggestion.
Yeah, I've read that report because I'm very interested in safe passages in regards to just general student safety. It's a really good report to read, because I was really floored, like, to hear the student testimonies, what students are experiencing just trying to get to and from school. I know Ashley Kearney at DEC about a year or so ago had one of her, maybe 2 of her students outline their day, just trying to get to school in the morning, which included, I believe, one student like crawling out of a Metro bus window because a fight had broke out on the bus. Anyway, I'm also thinking like how we, outside safe passages, leverage the building blocks initiative. And I'm thinking something ward level. I don't think like people are, I know building blocks is identified, specific blocks that they want to look at in the city. But I would like to, on my, I guess, personally or on a ward level, look at like, well, what, based on identified blocks, which ones have schools or popular school routes, to just elevate that. Like, it's not just the community, I guess, violence, but it's also like, you know, which blocks are close to schools, because I don't think, I know Dan, I feel like Dan, based on my conversation with him, has an interest in building blocks, but I don't think the connection on the other end has been made. And this is a great opportunity if investments are being made to kind of marry both initiatives where possible. All right, sorry. Okay, so it's 11:12. Sorry. Okay, so great. I think so. Just to recap, it seems like our overall, this group wants to look at a kind of a whole child safety approach. Look at I think have conversation with Dan, read that report, have a conversation with Dan around where Safe Passages is at the moment as we're leading into the beginning of the school year, and then identify some ward level initiatives if folks want to engage in that. Am I missing anything? Did I mischaracterize that summary?
And are we going to ask Dan to come to the next meeting?
Was that what you all, would you all like Dan to come to the next meeting? We can. Sure.
And do our homework before that.
Okay, sounds like a plan. Sounds like a plan. Cool. All right. So moving on. Thank you all. Where am I? Sorry, I lost my agenda, and because it's on remix and stuff. All right. Let's. I think this one might be fast. I'm not sure. I think it'll be faster than the guiding questions, word level outreach. But I just wanted to quickly maybe take 5 minutes for new business number 3, the themes from the 519 public comments. So I hope I didn't leave anyone out, but from what I gleaned, there were comments on the use of technology and responsible use of technology from Mrs. Wade, Mrs. Derringer. Jess Giles testified on equity and funding for reopening, which I think some of us are going to be addressing that, I guess, in our testimonies to council in a way. And then the DCPS reopening around teacher engagement. I'm not sure were there any lingering thoughts, or does anyone feel like this board needs to pick up any of that? Or because I know we mentioned, you know, public comment, we would just kind of look at what the themes were and do we need to do anything around those?
I guess I would just highlight, I did really appreciate the push from Ms. Derringer, Laura, and Brittany about being or pushing for our system leaders to also be more intentional and thoughtful about the technology piece. And maybe something I will just do off record first is reach out to the digital equity folks, because I think there has been, and rightfully so, throughout the pandemic, a real focus on you know, making sure that everybody obtains devices and Wi-Fi. Like that was the emergency push. Now that we're moving beyond the emergency, hopefully, I think this is a good moment to really recognize the need for more intentionality around how technology is used in school. Yeah, you know, and I think that the model that Laura shared was interesting and useful and deserves a little more attention, perhaps. So I would just make a push for that. But it's something that we need to, or I can volunteer to, you know, start looking more into that and seeing if there is something there for us to work on. I guess I would say that.
When you're doing that, can you look, I would really be interested in what the plan is, especially for DCPS, with all of the devices that have been delivered.
Can you say a little bit more about what do you mean what the plan is? Like,
okay, so they gave me a device. Or
yeah.
They gave my children. My 5 children were in the house with me. I'm I'm making this up, but my 5 children, they all got devices, all right? So what happens to those devices when the kids go back to school?
Oh, right. Yeah. So
Are
do
they
we
gonna be
or
mandated to take them back to school with them? Are they gonna be, what if they don't have them? Because I can visualize like half of the devices kind of disappearing into the ether between now and August. Has there been any plan from DCPS to track those devices? But not only were the devices, okay, let's say, because everyone didn't get a device, by the way, but not only were the devices, let's say everybody got one, all right, but then their Wi-Fi didn't work, or they didn't have this, or they didn't have that. So, and the population of students who went back to school or were working in the classroom, the failure rate is ridiculous, right? And they've done everything in the world to allow students to pass their classes, but still the students aren't turning any work in. Do you all feel that with your students in your wards?
it varies greatly, but yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, varies great because there's no follow-up. I mean, really all a student has to do to get perfect attendance is sign on to the computer. A lot of teachers have never seen their students one time.
Yeah.
They don't have to show their faces.
I do think yes. So I agree. The question of attendance varies greatly. I also agree that access to not just devices, but high quality, high speed internet varies. I understand what both Ms. Wade and Ms. Darren Dinger were saying. I don't necessarily see them. I see them both as issues related to technology. I'm not so sure I see them as intersecting, if that makes sense. I see one as a question of access, like purely like, do we have access so people can get what they need? I think that what we saw with like even like the vaccine rollout and people having to go online and register, and we were trying to figure out why Ward 3 got registered so much faster than people in 7 and 8. It wasn't just because of trust issues or just the speed of information. And a real part of it was that you needed the same skills to get Beyonce tickets that you needed to pre-register for a vaccine, which is high-speed internet and disposable time. And so I don't want to create an intersection, because I think in a lot of communities like mine, pushing for access, like full quality access, is really important. I do not want that to get conflated with conversations that rightfully should be had around like, okay, once we get kids online, like how much time are they spending? What parts are healthy? Like I think of them as separate, and I don't want to give any off ramps to excusing what I believe is our city's responsibility to make sure families have lifelines to the information and access that they need. So I think they're important, but I'm hesitant to allow any intersections, if that makes sense, between the two.
Yeah, you're right.
Especially as we return to school, because I mean, like we still have schools who like their Wi-Fi is janky, or they still don't have, or like what, like devices come back, like devices may not come back, like the quality of device varies. Like I worry about losing that strand of advocacy when we've not seen that, quite honestly, fully fulfilled, despite having gone through a pandemic, in exchange for moderating. Do you know what I mean? Like I think both are important, but I don't want to lose one.
Agree. Can I just ask your thoughts on, as you're speaking, I'm thinking that the access issue, and I know that folks talk about you know, that this should be treated like a utility.
I think so.
Yeah.
I'm
and-
that person. Yes.
Yeah, no, and I agree that the high-speed Wi-Fi should be the city, that's a city
Responsibility. Yep.
and jinx. And whereas the intentionality piece, maybe that is directed more. And when I say directed, I don't mean like in an accountability way, but in like an information way at schools, you know, school leaders, families, more as an information piece, right? Like here, and that's what I liked actually about how Ms. Dinger presented it. It was like, this was something you could hang on the wall, you know, to remind everybody in the classroom, like, these are what you're going for, kind of. So I feel like one is definitely, you're right. One is much more a sort of advocacy directed at our city leaders, that this is a, you know, basic rights issue at this point.
Yeah,
And-
I think, sorry, I think what she raised is more of a instructional question. Yeah, I don't know if that's something you would direct it, like certain, the Office of Teaching and Learning for DCPS, or, you know, I guess it's going to vary between LEAs, like if they're chief academic officers, like that type of thing, which is different than like DCPS, like what's your plan for technology, like Mayor Bowser, like what's up with Wi-Fi, you know, like
That makes a lot of sense. I think one's like a PD versus the other is a, you know, funding and advocacy issue. Yep.
But I agree with both of y'all that we need to advocate for the leaders to lead and to address the issues, period. And if they don't, then they don't need to be there. And because this is going to be, I don't even know what the plan is for the summertime.
Nobody knows.
Okay, but it's freaking the 21st of May. All right. I know what I'm doing this summer. I know what I'm doing in the fall. I've got classes finally again.
It's already summer. It's 80 degrees outside. What you talking about, Frazier?
I know it. I mean, my daughter put her air conditioner in yesterday. All right. You know, right. But what's the plan? My God, what is the plan? Let me know something, because we get the same information from the mayor that we get from Farabee, which is none.
So thanks. It seems like from public testimony areas that I guess members will not maybe pick up, but thinking about or including in statements or focusing on is, you know, access to the high-speed internet, but then also effective use of technology and instruction, or intentional use of technology and instruction. I'm sorry for remixing, because I just think I think we can get the old business out the way faster than the guiding question. So we got 2 more things and I think we can get it done. So for old business, there's 2 pieces. One, I'll do the second part. The process for advocacy initiatives. I just have to type it up clean and submit it to like Malayo and Caitlin to maybe make a nice infographic. But I'm not sure if anyone had any additions or whatnot. I also haven't shared anything out, but basically it's the same thing. I just need to type it up as what we previously discussed. I know in regards to, where is it? Previous updates on previous resolutions. I know I have not, for my resolution, read it and looked at more of what other loose ends. I'll just know that there's supposed to be quarterly sped updates. Has anybody, and it's okay if you haven't, but has anybody looked at their resolution and next steps? I think I see Emily doing something.
Hi, I'm doing something. Yes, no, I have a question and then I do have an update. So my question is, with the guidelines, what stage are you at? Like, it sounds like you're saying you're ready to share it. And I was not at the last meeting. I did watch part of it. And I had I had some questions for you all, because I feel like one of the things that came up was, you know, what is the purpose of the board's advocacy? And, you know, I heard that, you know, I think Frazier, you said it's about results. I heard a few other things. And I guess, you know, I think I would find it valuable to see that before you share it with Caitlin and Malaya, like what you've come up with, and to be able to discuss it again as a committee. So I don't know if that was the
I'll
plan.
share the document. I don't think it's because we've talked about it 2 meetings, plus I just got to write out the information. So I'll just make sure I like put it in like a draft form and share it. And then maybe it'll be more effective to have that conversation that way.
Yeah.
Because I feel like, I know if we mull things too much, we backtrack. And I feel like it's just a matter of, let's just try it and we can make some tweaks later in. But I do think it's a valuable, having a way of like addressing advocacy in a systemic way as things are coming up. Because I know people like email me and say like, this is a pertinent issue, or call and say, this is a pertinent issue. And I just want to make sure that it's access, not access isn't plays a role in what we advocate for, but it's more of a fair plane. So
Yeah.
I think that's very valuable because what happened with this safe passage discussion we had today, we ended up at a different place than we were at the beginning of the discussion. And I think that that's very helpful to me, the fact that we adjusted like that. Because I was, when we started talking about bicycles and it looked like that was the most important part of the safe passage part, I was really, really starting to rise up in my seat about that, because I like bicycles and all that, but walking is much more important than bicycles, and riding on buses is much more important than walking. And for kids to get to school. And so I think that conversation, so I would just like to, Colleen, we can talk about it at the next meeting, but if you can send us those things like Emily was saying, and we can just sort of brainstorm them and get them back to you, and you can get it back to us, then we, if we all agree on it without having to talk about it at the next meeting, just approving it at the next meeting, that'd be perfect.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that would be good to have sort of an email conversation about it, maybe.
I think having kind of almost trialed with Rep Sutter's advocacy, we probably, once we get the document in like a written format, we can see like, is this step needed? Is this step not needed? Because
Right.
I think today was a good kind of test trial. I didn't hit all the steps because I couldn't find the document in my Google Drive. But I think we have a gist of between what we did with the public comment and what we did with Representative Sutter's initiative. I think we touched on a couple of areas in how we tackle outreach. Ebony Rose, did you have something? No? Okay, cool. All right, so we knocked it out. And so did anyone, I know I have not touched my priority. Did anyone, but that's just me. Did anyone follow up on it?
I have an update. It's not so much that I followed up, it's just that I have an update on the resolution. I don't know what that is. The Latino, Latinx teacher recruitment and retention recommendations. So that is a document that actually the WTU, it's now called the International Teacher Task Force, uses in their advocacy. And right now there's sort of this, so they are working on a letter and pulling out some of the recommendations from that resolution. I mean, I should mention they helped also to, helped me to draft that. So they were very involved. Those are their recommendations pretty much from the beginning, including, also some of the empowered Latinx teacher advocates.
Are we still, did we decide we weren't going to say Latinx?
No, I mean, I think that, I hear both. And so in the resolution, it says both Latino and Latinx, but that is a term that, for instance, Isa Sanchez, who has testified a lot and who is also working on this advocacy, she uses that, whereas Samuel Cuadro, who's on the WTU task force, says Latino. I don't know. So
I just knew that there were some people I know who were offended by that.
I know. I think my sense is younger people use it, but I don't think that's even it. I think it's probably a political orientation. I don't know. I don't think we've decided anything about it. I'll
Okay.
say that to you know right now for expediency, but basically just wanted to give you an update that there's a sort of just fortuitous crossing of or coming together of efforts here because the WTU International Teacher Task Force was working on a letter, and then after our working meeting where OSSI presented their work on the teacher accreditation stuff, you know, and I asked the question about recruitment and making pathways for international teachers. They actually did follow up and made an appointment or made a meeting, scheduled a meeting. So that's going to be on June 4th. And so I'm going to have a meeting now with the some of the teachers that helped out with that resolution to know, like, to get from them input on which of those recommendations they think would make the most sense to discuss.
Now,
And
is,
I'll
is
also ask, I'll just say one more thing. I'm going to ask OSSI, I'll ask them if they want to be present. It's during school hours, so I don't know if they can. But if some of them want to attend as well and are able to, I will ask OSSI if they would be open to that. So I just wanted to give you that update.
is OSSI having, is this meeting on June the 4th about teacher retention?
It is specifically about pathways for international teachers. So yes, but a very specific area of that. So in our resolution, one of the recommendations was that, and this was based on, you know, a piece of, or it wasn't legislation, but it was I don't remember what it's called, like recommendations from the Ed Committee, that OSSI create an actual office, you know, that would be responsible for supporting international teacher recruitment and retention. And so there were some really specific points in there that ended up in our resolution. It's a lot, it's too many recommendations in there. But basically that's what it was drawing on was.
Do they have an office to recruit African-American teachers?
No, they don't. But that,
Well, you know, what the heck is going on then? Why would they not?
it's a different issue. It is actually. And this was the point that we argued when we had the two separate resolutions, because one involves visas and green cards and language, you know, different languages. And, you know, I do think that there's a different kind of support that international teachers
No,
need.
I agree with you completely. I'm just wondering, why don't they have an office to recruit African-American teachers?
Yeah. So, I mean,
You know,
that,
because that's, which, you know, as I told you, when I first started teaching, the majority of the teachers in DCPS were African-American teachers. The majority were African-American females, and the majority of the teachers were graduates of DC Teachers College.
right.
And now it's none of the above.
Right. Yeah.
But the population and the student population now is like 50-50.
Well, I will say that that is exactly what the Empower Ed advocacy is around. I mean, I shouldn't say exactly. It's not necessarily focused on African-American teachers, but it's on creating a pipeline that would help to diversify.
No, I agree, but
Yeah.
why in the heck doesn't OSSI have a?
Right. So they are in direct conversation with OSSI as well for the same reason, because it seems like, you know, the perfect moment where OSSI is actually like you know, they're thinking about and they're planning to improve their process and their priorities. So I do think, I mean, that is another question, and I know that has come up on this in this committee as well, is like, what is the role of the advocates who are working on specific issues that we are concerned with? What is their role in informing our work, you know, or not? So that's kind of a question. I know that this is something that, you know, I have talked with Scott about this because of our work. And I know that they've already had at least 2 conversations with OSCE about this.
Emily,
About what you're- what's that?
can you transition us to, speaking of like guiding questions, can you transition us to what came out of the admin committee regarding, I added it to our agenda, guiding questions from ward level outreach? You said that that came from the admin committee, and what do we need to do?
Yes, it's just a suggestion, so we don't need to do anything, but what came up was that Ruth actually recommended that at our next retreat that we share, and we being the members share, like how we do ward level outreach, what kinds of outreach, do we go to ANC meetings? Do we, what do we do in our wards? So just kind of learning from each other what we already do, what our aspirations are. And so it was suggested that maybe this committee come up with some guiding questions to guide that conversation. But
Oh, okay.
so just putting it out there for your input on whether you think that makes sense. If not, then I think Zach and I would do it.
That probably should
That's
come
if it
from
makes
y'all.
sense.
Wait, say Ebony Rose?
I'll wait. Go ahead, Fraser.
No, I was just saying that I think that Emily's right. That should come from the leadership.
I was going to say, are you asking if it makes sense for us to generate the questions or something?
Yeah, to kind of take responsibility for that activity, that it was just suggested that it kind of fit in with, advocacy and outreach, because it's about outreach, and maybe that was something that our committee would just lead. I can go either way on it. I don't feel strongly. Outreach is in our name. It doesn't, but it's a more casual conversation at the retreat, where I think we just want to, I think it's a good idea to, and I'm very curious and would look forward to learning from everybody. But I think in reality, the time that we'll have will probably be 2 questions, 3 at the most. So it's not a big deal, I guess is what I'm saying. Which could go either way. That means we could take it on easily, or we could also just say, nah, let's let leadership do it.
When is the retreat? Have they decided on that yet?
I don't think so. I don't think we've managed to find a date that works for everyone, but we'll decide by Monday for sure. We have to. So it might not work for everybody, but I think it's going to be late June, it looks like. Thoughts? Seems like not much enthusiasm.
I mean, so I don't feel a particular sense of I guess ownership. I don't know if it matters to me, like who generates the questions. I will say that I think part of this came from a conversation I had with Ruth, which I raised with the rest of the board around just like what's available for us to do war advocacy and resources. So I do think I have interest and enthusiasm in the conversation. And that's for sure. I feel strongly that the guiding questions have to come from the advocacy committee. If it's a matter of somebody just needs to do it, I'm happy to put together some questions. I don't mind. But that's where I'm at.
I was just saying that to have leadership do it, because I'd be excited about hearing what you want questions about. I mean, when you were mentioning about ANC meeting, I mean, the thing about advocacy, ward level outreach, I'm involved with the ANC meeting, with the community meetings and everything like that, but I'd like to hear if everybody else is involved with that kind of stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, it would just be interesting to, and it makes sense that we might do different things because our words are different, but it also
Right.
may be enlightening that like, oh, I should be doing that. Or
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So I'm happy. My sense is that Zach and I should just do it.
Okay, good.
Okay. Onward. And I'm sorry for taking up time or too much time with I just wanted to update you with the resolution piece. I will make one more point with that and then move on, which is just that I do think that advocacy has a longer life sometimes than we think, or the resolutions that we do, or the steps that we take may not have immediate results, so to speak, but that, advocates out there use these documents or use the fact that the state board took a stance, or, and so I just wanted to make sure that was part of our understanding of the value of the work that we do. It's not just about, passing a resolution that has some immediate and concrete outcome. So, yeah. Onward.
So we're about done. Thank you, Emily, for having, doing the follow-up on your resolution. Appreciate that. So our next meeting is Friday, June 18th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. I will work on inviting Dan Davis to, based on our conversation today, I will, I guess, kind of like just type up, what am I doing? Typing up recommendations, just basically typing up a synopsis of, and actually I might need one of you all to present it during our working group session because I'll be out of town. But just kind of typing up of like, this is what this body kind of came up with. I will share that with you all to provide feedback before it's shared with everyone. Emily is saying, make sure you all complete the retreat survey, which is in the chat. But yeah, we'll invite Dan Davis to speak at the next meeting, this body's next meeting or this committee's next meeting. I'll also work on just kind of like doing a brief synopsis of, what we arrived at around the couple of areas of advocacy from the public comment as well as Representative Sutter's area that she mentioned regarding kind of what we had landed on is like basically whole student safety. And then I will make sure that you all get the process for advocacy and outreach, and we'll try to see if we can handle it via email. If not, we'll just tag it to our June 18th meeting. Yeah, and then also for transparency, there's somebody reached out, Josh Boots, wanted to address this body. I think I'm gonna just tell him can you testify? Because again, it's one of the things that I don't want people to email me and just so they can get on this group's agenda. I want it to be fair. Fairness is a big thing for me. So just for transparency, I'm just going to tell him if he could either submit public comment and then we decide like how we did today, if we need to pick up whatever, it's not a whatever, what he's asking us to act on. So I think that's all.
I just ask in terms of the homework with the resolutions, should we, what should we, can you actually just send us an email saying when and what we should, and I know we're supposed to be using Asana too, y'all, we are. So I'll look at that. But if there's something more in detail that because that was just coincidental, honestly, that like, that was authentic. Like I didn't go back and look at the resolution, to be quite honest. It wasn't homework. It was more that it just came up. So
it was basically to, and I think because that was something we covered at the last meeting, was that we would look at our resolutions, and I think we put that in the notes, but we would look at our resolutions and then see if there were any action items that were needed and just kind of summarize what were the action items. Because I agree, like, yes, our advocates are looking for us to move on some things, but I also think it's meaningful for our advocates to actually see that we're not just making resolutions, but we're actually acting on it. And I think that's the more important piece for me, at least. So yeah, that I would just kind of summarize what it was. It's basically just look at your whatever resolution that you picked and to see if there was any open pieces that this board needs to just kind of put a bow on it, or put a bow for where we can at the moment, because some of them are bigger issues that aren't going to necessarily stop at one action, but an action is needed because we promised the community that we were doing an action. So
Right. On the outdoor learning resolution, we actually did, I think we influenced that $9 million bucket, to be honest, being made available for outdoor learning. And just an update on that, I have been trying to find out when schools can access that, because apparently they didn't know how to do it. So it's supposed to come out today. Or no, I think next week, sorry. It's supposed to come out next Friday, the new guidelines. So if you want to, if principals or partner orgs, whether outdoor learning or not, for the summer, like for summer programming, if partner orgs are wondering, like, are we going to get funding? Can we plan? That is a time where you can inform your principals. You should be getting this, outdoor learning and innovation guidelines next Friday. So that should be something you can use for partnerships if they want to. So just wanted to put that out there. Yeah, Fraser, sorry.
No, I was just wondering, you sort of answered it, but do they have a plan for outdoor learning for summer? It seems like summertime would be probably a good time to have outdoor learning.
It would. And so that's the thing, is like, we were hoping that those guidelines would come out in time for
spring,
for schools and partner orgs to plan, but it didn't. They put out outdoor learning guidelines that didn't include sort of how to apply for that money. So apparently that part is coming out next Friday. That will include, like, it's a grant basically. And so, but it's not a grant that you have to apply for. You just say, this is what we want. I think the main trigger here, an important thing, is that it's the instructional superintendents that make this possible for schools. So schools, or partners, if they have plans already, there are a lot of partnering organizations that already have existing partnerships with schools, and they just need the funding. So if that's the case, they just need to get their instructional superintendent on board. And then once they get the guidelines and the green light about the funding, they can move forward. That's what I understand.
And all the instructional superintendents are well-versed on outdoor learning.
Not that, but on what the school wants to do. It doesn't have to be outdoor learning. Like I said, any enriching programming, that's what that money is for. So it's outdoor learning and innovation, meaning like whatever programming you want to offer this summer or the fall. I shouldn't say whatever, but right, like within reason, you can apply for money out of this bucket.
So that theoretically, if I were, I could use all of the $9 million and it wouldn't have anything to do with outdoor learning.
Yeah.
Oh, that's just brilliant.
But it's off. I mean, I think the fact that it's part of the label makes a difference, because that has been.
Emily, don't be naive, please. It's
Don't
it's like librarians, right?
I'm not saying anyway. All right, onward.
Well, thank you all. Have a great weekend. I'll make sure
All right.
I send whatever I was supposed to send to you all via email.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Have a good weekend.